A growl shattered the silence of the night. Deep and primal, it resonated through the ancient pines, carrying with it the promise of teeth and claws. Emma Winters froze mid-step, her breath catching in her lungs as the sound echoed across the snow-laden forest. The carriage that had delivered her to the edge of this wilderness had long disappeared down the winding mountain pass, leaving her alone before the imposing iron gates of Black Ridge Manor. She pulled her cloak tighter, though the cold of Montana's winter had teeth sharper than mere fabric could defend against. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she took a steadying breath and pushed against the gates. They swung open with a mournful creak, revealing a path that wound upward through towering trees toward the silhouette of the manor house perched against the night sky. The growl came again, closer this time, threading between the trunks of pines like a hunting shadow. Emma's pulse quickened, but she didn't turn back. She couldn't. The message had been clear: service at Black Ridge Manor or destitution in the streets of Helena. At 28, with no family and few prospects, she had made her choice. "You have the scent of an enemy," a deep voice whispered from the darkness, so close she could almost feel the breath behind it, but also the scent of destiny. Emma whirled around but saw nothing except the gentle fall of snow in the darkness between trees. A trick of the wind, perhaps, or her own fear giving voice to the wilderness. She squared her shoulders and continued toward the manor, each step leaving a brief history in the snow, soon to be erased by the relentless fall of white. Black Ridge Manor loomed ahead, a massive structure of dark stone and timber that seemed to grow from the very mountain itself. Its windows glowed with faint amber light, like the eyes of some great beast watching her approach. Above the main entrance, carved into ancient wood, was the sigil she'd seen on the gates. A wolf's head split down the middle, one half bathed in light, the other consumed by shadow. The carriage driver's final words echoed in her mind. No one enters Alpha Gray's territory and emerges unscathed. Yet here she stood at the threshold of what many in Helena whispered was not merely a home, but a fortress where women served until they disappeared. As Emma reached the courtyard, shadows moved in her peripheral vision. Figures gathered in a loose semicircle, their eyes reflecting the torchlight with an unnatural gleam. The pack had assembled to inspect the newcomer, their faces impassive and cold as the surrounding mountains. None spoke, none smiled. They simply watched with the patience of predators. From among them stepped an older man, tall and weathered, with silver hair cropped short in a military fashion. His posture spoke of battles fought long ago, of discipline forged in fire. He studied Emma with eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. "Name," the word came out like a command, not a question. "Emma Winters," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. The man exchanged a glance with another male standing in the shadows, something unspoken passing between them. Then his gaze returned to Emma, lingering for a moment on her face. "Her eyes," he murmured to his companion, just loud enough for Emma to hear, "they're identical to hers." The observation sent a chill through Emma that had nothing to do with the snow. Before she could question his meaning, the older man turned back to her. "I'm Captain James Harlow, head of security. You'll serve in the main hall. Don't speak unless spoken to, and avoid looking directly at him." "At who?" Emma asked, unable to stop herself. Harlow's expression didn't change. "You'll know." He led her through massive oak doors into the warmth of the manor. The interior was a study in contrasts, opulent yet severe, with high ceilings and stone walls softened by rich tapestries depicting wolves in various hunting scenes. The air smelled of pine wood smoke and something deeper, more primal, that made the hair on Emma's arms stand on end. They followed a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced men, each bearing some resemblance to the next, a lineage written in shared features and the same stormy gray eyes. At the far end, the passage opened into a grand hall that stole Emma's breath with its scale and beauty. Fire roared in a hearth large enough to stand and casting dancing shadows across long tables of polished wood. Silver goblets and candelabras glinted in the firelight, untouched and perfect. At the far end, near a set of windows that overlooked the valley below, stood a solitary figure with his back to the room. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a black coat that hung unbuttoned as though formality was an afterthought. His dark hair caught the firelight, turning the edges to burnished copper. He stood with the easy confidence of a man who never questioned his place in the world, who expected the mountains themselves to bow at his command. "Alpha," Harlow announced softly, "the new attendant has arrived." The man turned and the world around Emma seemed to still as if all sound and movement had been sucked from the air. His eyes found hers across the vast expanse of the hall, gray as storm clouds but alive with something that made her chest tighten. A hunger lived in them, controlled, but never tamed, watching her from behind the mask of civilization. Tristan Gray Alpha of the Black Ridge Pack studied Emma with an intensity that made her skin flush, despite the lingering cold. His gaze traveled slowly from her face to her hands, then back again, lingering briefly at the collar of her dress where it covered the base of her throat. The air between them changed, growing heavy with something ancient and unspoken. A charge like the moment before lightning strikes filled the space between heartbeats. "Leave us," he said quietly. Harlow hesitated, his eyes darting between Emma and his alpha. "I said," Tristan's voice deepened to something that wasn't quite human. "Leave us." The captain and the few servants present scattered like autumn leaves before a storm, the heavy doors closing behind them with a finality that made Emma's stomach tighten. She stood alone in the vast hall, with a man whose very presence seemed to alter the air around him. Silence stretched between them, thick as fresh fallen snow. Emma didn't know where to look, but found her eyes drawn back to his against her will. "I didn't request another attendant," he finally said, his voice carrying easily across the space. "I was assigned," she replied, surprised at the steadiness of her own words. Something flickered across his features, too quick to name. Amusement, perhaps, or curiosity. "You shouldn't be here," he said, the words falling between them like stones in still water. Emma's heart skipped. "Then why accept me?" "Because they don't understand what I become when I lose control." She swallowed hard against the sudden dryness in her throat. "And what is that?" He stepped closer, the air shifting around him like the forest itself had paused its breathing. "You'll discover soon enough." With that, he turned and walked away, the sound of his boots echoing in the emptiness, leaving Emma trembling and utterly alone in the great hall. That night, the wind returned, howling against her bedroom window like a living creature begging entrance. Emma lay awake, her new quarters more luxurious than any she'd known, yet she found no comfort in the soft bed or warm fire. Every shadow seemed alive with watchful intent. Then she heard it. A voice outside her door, low and edge-rough, unmistakable, even muffled by the thick wood. "Why did you come here?" The voice came again, closer this time, barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have come here." Emma froze in her bed, every muscle locked tight. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd imagined it, that the mountain wind had simply learned to mimic human speech. Then came the sound, boots scraping softly against stone, a breath drawn in through teeth, scenting the air. Her pulse roared in her ears like a river in flood. The air shifted beneath her door, heavy with the faintest trace of cedar and smoke. His scent. She waited, hardly daring to breathe until the footsteps faded down the corridor. Only then did she exhale, curling beneath the blankets, her hand rising unconsciously to the base of her throat, where a faint scar traced a pattern she'd carried since childhood. As her fingers brushed the mark, she could have sworn it warmed beneath her touch, pulsing once with a life of its own. Emma didn't sleep until dawn, bled pale light through the frost-laced window. When morning came, the manor was already awake, humming with the quiet efficiency of a place long accustomed to routine. Emma dressed quickly in the simple black dress provided for her, then made her way down to the kitchens as instructed the night before. The pack moved through the corridors like shadows given purpose, their eyes following her as though she carried a contagion. No one spoke directly to her, not even the cook, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and hands gnarled from decades of work. She simply placed a tray of tea and bread before Emma, her eyes briefly lingering on the younger woman's face with something that might have been pity. "Eleanor," the woman finally said, touching her own chest. "Been cooking for the Grays since before the current Alpha was born." Her voice was soft, weathered by years, but not unkind. "Emma," she replied, grateful for even this small connection. Eleanor nodded once, then glanced over Emma's shoulder, her expression shuddering. "The one before had your scent," she murmured so quietly Emma nearly missed it. "Before she vanished." Before Emma could ask what that meant, a shadow fell across the kitchen threshold. A tall man with sharp features and cold eyes stood watching them. Not Tristan, but someone who carried himself with similar authority, though tempered with caution that the Alpha lacked. "You're with me," he said, his eyes not quite meeting hers. "Alpha's orders. You serve in his quarters now." Emma's stomach twisted. "His? Don't make me repeat myself." The man turned, clearly expecting her to follow. As they climbed the narrow stairs toward the northern tower, the manor grew quieter, the stone older bearing the weight of generations. The man who eventually introduced himself as Daniel Morrison Beta to Tristan's Alpha led her past corridors she hadn't seen during her arrival. The Alpha values his privacy, Daniel said, his voice carefully neutral. Serve him well and you may survive longer than most. The casual cruelty of his assessment froze the question on Emma's lips. Before she could recover, they arrived at a set of tall black doors ornately carved with the same split wolf motif from the main gates. Go in, Daniel said, then left her standing alone before the imposing entrance. Emma hesitated, then pushed the door open. The room beyond was vast and dimly lit, washed in the gray light of morning, filtered through tall windows overlooking the forest and mountains beyond. A single fire burned in the hearth, throwing long shadows against the stone walls. Weapons hung beside the windows, their metal gleaming faintly in the half-light. And there, seated in an armchair near the fire, was Tristan Gray. His gaze lifted lazily from the book in his hands, but the effect struck like lightning. Those gray eyes didn't merely look. They searched, peeling back layers as if her very soul lay exposed before him. You didn't sleep, he said, making it a statement rather than a question. Emma stiffened. How would you know? He tilted his head slightly, studying her. You smell of fear and exhaustion. Wolves can tell. She wanted to ask why he'd been outside her door in the night, but the words refused to form. Instead, she asked, What do you want me to do? His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Keep this room in order. Fire-fed, desk-cleared, tea at dawn. That's all for now. Emma nodded and set about gathering the scattered papers from his desk, acutely aware of his eyes following her every movement. The silence between them was unbearable, charged with an energy she couldn't name. After several minutes, his voice broke the quiet. You're not from the northern clans, he murmured. No, she replied cautiously. Then where? Helena. Before that, the valley below the pass. Strange, he said, rising from his chair with fluid grace. That mark on your neck doesn't belong to valley bloodlines. Her hand flew to the scar beneath her collar, a reflex she couldn't control. You shouldn't ask things like that. And yet, he said softly, suddenly closer than he'd been a moment before, I just did. She turned toward him, words sharp on her tongue, but stopped when she saw the expression in his eyes. Not anger, but recognition, as if he'd found a long-lost possession he'd given up for lost. What do you know about me? She whispered. Enough to wonder why you were sent here, he replied, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room. Be careful in this house, Emma Winters. Wolves remember scent better than faces. After completing her duties, Emma fled the room, his words following her like shadows down the corridor. The manor seemed to expand as Emma explored it in the hours that followed, a labyrinth of stone and secrets far larger than it appeared from outside. In a far wing, she discovered a room filled with weapons and maps, where Captain Harlow sat cleaning an antique pistol with meticulous care. He looked up as she entered, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. Most servants know better than to wander these halls alone. I'm sorry, I was just... Her words trailed off as she noticed the military medals displayed in a small case beside him. Harlow followed her gaze. Captain James Harlow, 2nd Infantry Division, Korea 52. He said, a hint of pride softening his stern features. Long before your time. You've been with the Gray family for decades then, Emma asked, sensing an opportunity to learn more. The old soldier nodded slowly. Military advisor to the previous Alpha at first, then security chief after the clan wars 30 years ago. He sighted down the barrel of his pistol, checking the alignment. Stayed on when Tristan took command. Clan wars, Emma ventured. Harlow's eyes flicked to her face, assessing. Not just territory disputes. It was about survival. He set the gun down carefully. I've seen many men lose their humanity because of what they had to do in battle. But all of us deserve redemption, even those who have gone too far. His gaze drifted to the scar partially visible at Emma's collar. That mark, I've seen it on another woman. A woman who changed Tristan forever. Before Emma could ask what he meant, a bell rang somewhere in the depths of the manor. Harlow rose, returning the pistol to its case. Best get back to your duties. The Alpha doesn't appreciate curiosity in his staff. As days passed, Emma became increasingly aware of the whispers that followed her through the corridors. Servants and pack members alike spoke in hushed tones when they thought she couldn't hear. She won't last a week. The last one screamed before dawn. He's losing control again. Yet Tristan himself said nothing of these rumors. He simply watched her when she entered his room each morning, his gaze following her movements with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. Sometimes she caught him staring at her throat at the mark hidden beneath her high collar, his expression unreadable, yet somehow hungry. On the third night, unable to sleep, Emma rose from her bed and crossed to the window. The moon hung full and white above the frozen courtyard, casting everything in silver light. Something moved below, drawing her attention. A dark figure stood half hidden by the trees in the inner courtyard. Tall, bare-armed, despite the cold, his head tilted slightly upward. Her breath caught. It was Tristan, the moonlight painting silver over his shoulders, his chest rising with slow, deliberate breaths. His eyes were closed, but his nostrils flared as if he were breathing her in from a distance. And then faintly she heard it through the glass, barely a whisper carried on the night air her name. Emma. Her hands trembled against the window pane. As if sensing her watching, he opened his eyes gray and wild under the moon, and for a heartbeat she could have sworn he smiled. Then he was gone, the space where he'd stood shimmering, empty, the forest swallowing him whole. The night after she saw Tristan vanish into the trees, sleep refused to come. Emma sat at the edge of her bed, the window half open to the cold, as if she hoped the wind might carry an explanation. Instead, it brought only his scentwood smoke and something darker that made her chest ache with an unnamed longing. The manor was silent, the kind of silence that seems to wait for a scream. She rose, pulled a shawl over her nightdress, and slipped into the corridor, driven by curiosity stronger than caution. The torches had burned low, leaving only thin trails of smoke curling against the stone. Every shadow looked alive, every corner concealing potential threats. She wandered without destination, simply allowing her feet to carry her where they would. Halfway down a corridor she hadn't explored before, Emma heard footsteps behind her. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. She turned and froze in place. Tristan stood at the end of the hall, half in shadow. No coat, no boots, just the bare tension of muscle under linen. His eyes caught what little light remained gleaming like a wolf's in the dark. The sight of him made her heart stutter in her chest. "Why are you watching me?" she asked before she could stop herself. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked closer, each step silent and predatory until the air between them seemed to vibrate with tension. "You shouldn't be out of your room," he murmured, his voice rough at the edges, as if he'd been running. "You were outside my window," she countered. His jaw flexed. "I couldn't sleep." "Because of me." The question landed between them like lightning striking earth. His breath left him in a rough exhale, not quite a laugh. "You have no idea what you do to me." When she tried to move past his hand, caught her wrist, not hard but enough to stop her in place. The heat of his skin burned through the fabric of her sleeve like a brand. Their eyes locked and something dark and hungry flared in the gray depths of his. "Let go," she whispered. He didn't. Instead, he turned her wrist over slowly, his thumb brushing the faint pulse beneath. His eyes darkened further, pupils expanding, until only a thin ring of gray remained. "You smell like the first rain after a drought," he said, voice breaking on the edge of control. "It's maddening." "Why does it matter?" she asked, her own voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "Because I've spent years trying not to want anyone," he said, leaning closer until his breath touched her skin. "And now you're all I can breathe." Her heartbeat stuttered. He was too close, too warm, too dangerous. And yet she didn't pull away. The hallway spun with heat and shadow, his presence overwhelming her senses until all she could see, all she could feel was him. He pressed her hand gently against the stone wall, his forehead lowering until it hovered beside hers. She felt him inhale slow and deep and shaking, as if drawing her essence into himself. "Tristan," she whispered the first time she'd used his name. His eyes lifted to hers, wild with barely contained hunger. "Don't pull away." He murmured the words, both command and plea. Her pulse surged, her body betraying her fear and want in equal measure. "I wasn't planning to." The air between them was pure electricity, every breath, every heartbeat, a war between restraint and desire. But before either could move closer, a sound shattered the moment, a door creaking at the far end of the corridor, followed by hurried footsteps. Two maids emerged carrying fresh linens, freezing in place when they saw the Alpha standing over Emma. Tristan stepped back at once, his expression becoming unreadable. The beast shoved behind his eyes. "Go back to your room," he said, the words clipped in cold, all trace of vulnerability gone. Emma obeyed, legs trembling, her skin still burning where his hand had been. Back in her chamber, she shut the door and pressed her back to it, gasping for air that wouldn't fill her lungs. Whatever had just happened, whatever had nearly happened, wasn't something she could name. And yet she wanted it again with an intensity that frightened her. She reached for the wash basin, splashing cold water on her face, trying to steady the riot inside her. That's when she saw it in the mirror movement, in the reflection behind her. A figure in the hallway, gone before she could turn. She froze, heart racing anew. Someone had been watching. The next morning, Emma sought out the manor's healer at Eleanor's suggestion. "For the headaches," the cook had said with a knowing look, though Emma hadn't mentioned any such ailment, "ask for Raymond. He knows things others don't." She found Raymond Wolfe in a small cabin at the edge of the manor grounds. The old Cherokee man with silver hair in a neat braid down his back welcomed her with quiet dignity. His cabin smelled of herbs and history walls lined with books older than Emma herself. "I've been expecting you," he said, gesturing for her to sit by the fire. "The mark calls to those who understand its language." Emma's hand rose instinctively to her throat. "What do you know about this scar?" Raymond studied her with eyes dark and wise as the ancient forests. "That isn't a scar anymore," he said softly. "It's awakening." He leaned forward, gently moving her collar aside to better see the mark. His touch was clinical, respectful, yet Emma felt exposed in a way that transcended the physical. "Tristan once marked someone like this years ago," Raymond said, his voice carrying the weight of painful memory. "The bond consumed her." "Bond," Emma echoed. "When an alpha marks a mate before the moon accepts it, one always dies." He explained, his eyes never leaving the mark. "This is what we call the moon mark, a bond formed too soon without celestial blessing." Cold fear washed through Emma. She didn't survive. "No," Raymond whispered. "He's never taken another since." "But he didn't mark me," Emma protested, pulling away. "I'd remember something like that." The healer's expression softened with something like pity. "Memory doesn't matter. If his wolf chose you once, the mark remembers what your mind has forgotten." Emma left Raymond's cabin with more questions than answers, her thoughts churning like storm clouds. The mark on her neck felt different now, alive in a way she'd never noticed before, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. That night, unable to sleep, she found herself drawn deeper into the manor's depths than she'd ventured before. The stone corridors grew older, the air colder as she descended past the main levels. A faint sound guided her steps, soft and broken, almost a cry echoing from somewhere below. She followed it through a narrow passage behind the wine cellar where cobwebs brushed her face and the stone was damp beneath her fingertips. The scent thickened blood iron and something wild that made the hair on her arms rise. Then she saw it, a door iron-banded, half buried in the wall, old enough that moss crept through its cracks. A thin line of light shimmered beneath it, red like the last flicker of dying coals. The cry came again, weak and trembling, from the other side. Emma hesitated only a second before reaching for the handle. It was ice cold to the touch. When she pulled, it didn't budge. Locked. She pressed her ear to the wood, straining to hear. The air on the other side felt alive somehow, humming faintly against her skin. Something shifted within, a heavy movement, followed by a thud against the door. Emma stumbled backward, heart racing. "Emma!" Her name, spoken not in plea, but in warning, made her spin around. Tristan stood in the passage behind her, his appearance different in the dim torchlight. His eyes weren't the calm gray she remembered, but darker, almost silver-white, with an inner fire she couldn't name. His jaw was tight, his breathing uneven, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. "What are you doing down here?" he demanded, voice rough with something more animal than human. "There's someone behind the door," she said. "I heard them." "Don't," he said, the word cracking with desperation. "You don't open that door, ever." He stepped forward, slamming his palm flat against the wood as if to hold it shut. The sound echoed through the narrow hall, and for the first time Emma saw genuine fear in his eyes. "What is this place?" she asked, her own voice strange to her ears. He didn't answer immediately. His chest heaved with barely controlled breaths, his scent thick with wild energy that made her dizzy. "You weren't supposed to find it," he finally said, voice low. "Go back upstairs, now." "Not until you tell me what's inside," she insisted. standing her ground despite every instinct screaming to flee. His eyes burned into hers, veins rising beneath his skin, as if something beneath the surface was clawing to get out. "Please, Emma," he said, softer now, almost broken. "Don't come here again." Something in his tone, something raw, made her step back. For a moment he looked less like a monster and more like a man terrified of himself. She opened her mouth to speak, but the ground beneath them shuddered faintly. A low growl rolled from behind the door, making the iron shake in its frame. Tristan pressed both hands against it, muttering something under his breath, something guttural and ancient. The noise stilled, but the tension in his body only increased. "Go," he whispered, not looking at her. Emma turned and ran, not stopping until she reached the upper levels of the manor, lungs burning with exertion. She slammed her bedroom door, pressing her back against it, trying to breathe through the pounding in her ears. Deep within the manor, she could still feel it, the faint hum of whatever slept behind that door, calling to her, marked to her blood, to something she didn't understand. Later that night, as moonlight pooled on her bedroom floor, Emma overheard two maids whispering in the corridor outside her room. Their voices drifted through the old wood clear enough for her to catch fragments that chilled her blood. "The new one won't last either," one said. "None of them." "Hush," the other warned, glancing around nervously. "If he finds out, we know. How could we not know? They vanish every time. The Alpha takes them and they never come back." Emma's stomach turned to ice. The words sank deep, cold, and certain as death. When the maids noticed her shadow beneath the door, they fell silent, then hurried away, leaving her alone with terrible new knowledge. What kind of place had she come to? What happened to the women who served here before her? And why did Tristan look at her with equal parts hunger and dread, as if she were both salvation and destruction? The mark on her neck burned as she tried to sleep, hot and insistent, like a warning she couldn't quite understand. Somewhere deep within Black Ridge Manor, a low growl rolled through the stone like distant thunder, and Emma finally comprehended the danger she was in. She wasn't the first woman to bear this mark, and if she stayed, she might well be the last. The mark on Emma's neck throbbed like a second heartbeat as she fled up the corridor. Each pulse sent ripples of heat through her veins, as if something ancient had awakened in her blood. She reached her room, closed the door with trembling hands, and pressed her palm against the scar that now felt alive beneath her skin. Sleep refused her that night. The memory of what she'd seen, the mysterious door in the basement, the fear in Tristan's eyes, the whispers of maids about women who vanished, left her mind spinning like autumn leaves in a storm. When dawn finally streaked pale fingers across the mountains, Emma abandoned her attempts at rest and dressed with purpose. She needed answers, not more shadows. The smell of fresh bread led her to the kitchens, where Eleanor's weathered hands worked dough with the sureness that comes only from decades of practice. The older woman glanced up at Emma's entrance, her eyes lingering on the younger woman's throat, where the mark pulsed faintly beneath her high collar. Without a word, Eleanor gestured toward a small side door. "He's expecting you," she said, simply returning to her work. Raymond's cabin sat at the edge of the grounds, partially hidden by ancient pines. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows, dancing with dust motes and the smoke from herbs burning in a stone bowl. The old Cherokee man's silver braid hung down his back as he worked with a mortar and pestle, his movements precise and unhurried. "The mark woke you early," he said without turning, his voice carrying the weight of mountains. "Not a question, but recognition." "It burns," Emma admitted, her hand rising unconsciously to her throat. "And last night I heard things in the lower levels." Raymond set aside his work and turned to face her. Time had carved wisdom into his face, etching lines that spoke of a century's worth of watching and waiting. He motioned for her to sit on a wooden stool near the hearth. "Show me," he instructed. Emma hesitated before loosening her collar to reveal the mark fully. Raymond's breath caught audibly. The scar, once a faint silver line against her skin, had darkened overnight to the color of old wine. Tendrils of shadow reached outward from its center, like the roots of a tree seeking water. "It's not a scar anymore," Raymond said, his voice dropping to match the reverence of a confession. "It's awakening." "What does that mean?" Emma asked, fear and frustration coloring her words. The healer's eyes grew distant, as if looking through time itself. "Tristan once marked someone like this years ago," he said finally. The bond consumed her. "Bond," Emma echoed. "When an alpha marks a mate before fourth moon accepts it, one always dies," he explained, voice barely above a whisper. The bond forms, but without blessing, it tears both souls apart. Cold dread washed through Emma. She didn't survive. No, Raymond confirmed the single word heavy with history. He's never taken another since. Emma shook her head, confusion battling disbelief. But he didn't mark me. I would remember something like that. Raymond's expression softened with something like pity. Memory doesn't matter, he said gently. If his wolf chose you once, the mark remembers what your mind has forgotten. He reached for a leather pouch hanging near the fire, extracting a handful of dried leaves that released a sweet, sharp scent when he crushed them between his fingers. For the pain, he explained, pressing the herbs into her palm. Steep these at night. They cannot stop what's coming, but they may ease the journey. What journey? Emma asked, clouching the herbs. What's happening to me? Raymond's gaze seemed to see past her through her. The awakening of something older than the mountains, he said, the recognition of what was always meant to be. As Emma left the cabin, sunlight struck her face with unexpected warmth, a stark contrast to the chill that had settled in her bones. She felt different somehow, as if the conversation had altered more than just her understanding. The wind carried her scent across the grounds, and from the manor's highest window, Tristan watched her return, his knuckles white against the stone sill. That night, restlessness drove Emma from her room. The manor slept around her, its ancient stones humming with his secrets as she wandered the western gallery, where tall windows admitted streams of moonlight. She paused before a portrait of a young man with familiar gray eyes, his expression unguarded in a way Tristan's never was now. That was painted the summer before he became Alpha. Captain Harlow's voice came from behind her. Emma turned to find the old soldier standing a respectful distance away, hands clasped behind his back in military precision. Moonlight silvered his hair and deepened the lines of his face, revealing the weight of years and memories. Before the clan wars, she ventured, recalling their earlier conversation. Harlow nodded slowly. Before everything changed. His gaze shifted to the portrait. He was different then. We all were. What happened? Emma asked, sensing an opening into the past she might not get again. War happened. The captain's voice lowered, roughened by memories he seldom shared. Territory disputes turned bloody when the Moonstone Pact challenged the Gray's claim to these mountains. Their alpha, James Blackwood, made a fatal mistake in challenging Tristan's right of succession. You fought for the Grays, Emma stated, noting the slight shift in his posture at the mention of battle. I was military advisor to Tristan's father, he confirmed. Before that, Korea taught me that today's enemy might be tomorrow's ally, but the scars remain either way. His weathered hand touched his side briefly where Emma guessed an old wound lay hidden. Some wounds go deeper than flesh. Raymond said Tristan marked someone once, she said cautiously. A woman who didn't survive. Harlow's face grew still like water freezing over. In Korea, he said, after a moment, I watched men do terrible things to survive, then spend the rest of their lives trying to make peace with those actions. His gaze returned to her, lingering briefly on her collar where the mark lay hidden. That mark you bear, I've seen it before, on a woman who changed Tristan forever. And who was she? Emma pressed. The captain's eyes held hers, measuring what she was ready to know. Sometimes truth is more dangerous than ignorance, Miss Winters, he said finally. But I'll tell you this, war forces choices no one should have to make, and peace requires facing the consequences of those choices. That's something an old soldier learns the hard way. Before she could question him further, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Harlow straightened his demeanor, shifting instantly to formal attention. Best return to your quarters, he advised. These halls have ears, and not all of them belong to friends. Emma slipped away, questions multiplying with each step. As she rounded the corner toward her room, she nearly collided with Daniel, the beta's face tight with barely suppressed emotion. You should be more careful where you wander, he said, his voice carrying an edge she hadn't heard before, especially after dark. I was just speaking with the captain, Daniel finished for her, about things that don't concern you. His gaze flicked to her throat, lingering on the place where her collar covered the mark. Something like recognition flashed in his eyes, followed quickly by what might have been fear. You have her scent, he muttered almost to himself. After all these years, exactly the same. Whose scent? Emma demanded, tired of half-truths and meaningful glances. Daniel studied her for a long moment, as if weighing what to reveal. His jaw tightened, but something in her expression must have convinced him of her right to know. "You should leave this place while you still can," he said finally. "The Alpha is losing control because of you." Every day you stay, he asked himself, could it be her? It's not easy watching an Alpha unravel. Who is her? Emma pressed, determined not to be deflected again. The Beta's eyes hardened, but his voice dropped to a near whisper. "Lyanna Blackwood," he said, "the woman Tristan once loved and killed." The name struck Emma like a physical blow, resonating through her body and settling in her bones. Lyanna Blackwood. She'd never heard it before, and yet it felt familiar, like an echo of something long forgotten. That night, her dreams were filled with fire. She stood in a great hall. She'd never seen flames licking up tapestries and consuming wooden beams with hungry roars. Blood stained her hands warm and sticky. Across a sea of fallen bodies, Tristan stared at her. His eyes not the cool gray she knew, but burning gold with the wolf ascendant. He whispered a name through the flames, not Emma, something else that clung to the edges of her consciousness, retreating like mist before sunrise each time she tried to grasp it. She woke gasping, drenched in sweat despite the mountain chill. The mark on her neck throbbed in painful rhythm, keeping time with a name she couldn't quite grasp. Moonlight pooled on her floor, bright as day, illuminating a figure standing in her doorway. Tristan, his shirt half undone, hair wild as if he'd been running his hands through it, eyes haunted from sleeplessness. He watched her with an intensity that made her blood sing. "You went to the healer," he said, voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite control. Emma rose from the bed, pulling her shawl close. "I needed answers." "And did you find them?" he asked, his gaze never leaving hers. "Not enough," she replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. "I dreamed of fire, of you. I heard a name." Something in his expression shifted a crack, appearing in his carefully maintained control. "What name?" he asked, the words barely audible. Emma closed her eyes, reaching for the fragments of the dream still floating in her consciousness. A name rose to her lips, emerging from somewhere deep within her, a place she hadn't known existed. "Lyanna," she whispered. Tristan went completely still, not even breathing for a heartbeat. When he spoke again, his voice shook with the effort of control. "How do you know that name?" "I don't know," Emma admitted, confusion evident in her tone. "It just came from somewhere inside me." Tristan stepped into the room, unable to take his eyes from her face. The moonlight caught the silver in his eyes, turning them luminous. "I thought you were dead," he said, the words raw with remembered pain. Emma's heart stuttered in her chest. "What are you talking about?" "Because I buried you, Emma." His voice broke on her name. "Or should I call you Lyanna?" The world seemed to tilt around her reality, shifting like sand beneath her feet. "I don't understand," she whispered, though some deep part of her recognized the truth in his words. Tristan moved closer, his presence filling the small room with barely contained energy. "Years ago," he began, each word carefully chosen, "I found a girl at the border of my territory, running from something. Afraid but defiant. My wolf recognized her before my mind could stop it." Emma listened, transfixed, as pieces of a past she couldn't remember unfolded before her. "You weren't supposed to be mine," he continued, the admission clearly painful. "But the moment I touched you, it was done. My wolf marked you without the moon's blessing." "The bond rejected itself," Emma finished, understanding dawning as she recalled Raymond's words. "And I nearly died because of it." He nodded, once anguish flickering across his face. "Raymond bound your memory and sealed the mark to save you. You were sent away, told you'd been attacked by rogues. You forgot me, but I never forgot you." "Then why am I here?" she asked, struggling to reconcile his story with her reality. "Why did you let me return if you knew the danger?" Tristan's laugh held no humor, only bitterness. "I didn't know who you were when you were sent, but the moment you crossed my threshold, I felt it, the scent I had buried alive again. And you said nothing." Anger flared suddenly, hot and bright in Emma's chest. "You just watched me, followed me, knowing what might happen." "I tried to keep my distance," he said, a muscle working in his jaw. "I tried to send you away. But the wolf—" He stopped, his hands clenching at his sides. The wolf remembered what the man had forced himself to forget. Emma stared at him, heart thundering in her chest, as fragments of memory began stirring like sediment disturbed at the bottom of a clear pool. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick to breathe. I need to know everything, she said, her voice gaining strength with determination. No more half-truths, no more riddles. Tristan held her gaze, something like resignation passing over his features. Then you should sit, he said softly. It's not a gentle story. He told her then of the war between the packs of territory and power and ancient grudges, of how James Blackwood Alpha of the Moonstone Pack had challenged the Gray's dominion over the mountain range, of battle and blood and the night when everything changed. Your father was a good man, Tristan admitted, surprising her with his honesty. A better alpha than I have ever been. But the council demanded blood for blood, and I was young, angry, certain of my righteousness. Emma listened, her heart breaking for a past she couldn't remember, for a father she would never know, for the man Tristan had been, and the one he'd become because of her. When the fires died down, he continued, his voice hollow now. I found you in the ruins, half dead, terrified, but still fighting. My wolf recognized something in you immediately. I thought it was just the instinct to protect. I didn't understand until it was too late. The silence that followed was unbearable. Emma's heart hammered so hard it hurt. She wanted to scream, to cry, to strike him. Yet all she could do was feel him, the air between them vibrating with the bond neither had chosen, but both now carried. Tristan stepped closer, every movement deliberate, measured, as if approaching a wounded animal that might bolt at any moment. His breath mingled with hers as he spoke, his voice a whisper that burned. You should hate me, he said, eyes dark with memory. Maybe I do, she breathed, but that doesn't stop this. She gestured to the space between them, to the invisible current that pulled them together despite everything. He flinched, as though her words wounded him more deeply than any physical blow could have. And then his restraint broke. His hand found the wall beside her, caging her in without touching. The other hovered near her face, trembling with the effort not to make contact. She should move. She didn't. His scent, wild, dark, familiar, wrapped around her, pulling the breath from her lungs. This is madness, he muttered, lowering his forehead until it almost touched hers. Then stop, she challenged, though every cell in her body screamed for the opposite. I can't. Their breaths tangled in the small space between them. Every heartbeat a war between fury and longing. Emma's hands rose to clutch the front of his shirt, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. You're not supposed to be here, he whispered, agony in every syllable. Then send me away. I already tried. That's when she did it, slow, trembling, defiant. She kissed him. The world stopped. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't soft. It was the kind of kiss that rewrites memory, that makes pain and desire indistinguishable. His hands clutched her waist, her hair, her throat, every part of him burning with the agony of wanting what he shouldn't have. Then the mark ignited. Heat surged through both of them, like lightning finding earth. Emma gasped as pain and pleasure collided, light flaring beneath her skin, so bright it shone through the thin fabric of her nightgown. Tristan jerked back with a growl, his eyes blazing gold, the wolf in him roaring to claim her. Emma, no, he choked out. You'll burn. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest as the mark pulsed violently, glowing red through her fingers. Tristan knelt before her, his hands hovering, trembling with helplessness as he watched her suffer. What's happening to me? She gasped through the pain. Tristan's face twisted in horror as his own body began to change, claws emerging where human fingers had been moments before. The bond is trying to finish what it started, he rasped, his voice distorting as his control slipped. The words had barely left his lips when the change ripped through him. His body jerked violently, bones cracking, the sound of sinew tearing echoing through the chamber. Emma screamed his name, but he was already shifting. Half man, half beast, his control shattered by the mark's awakening. Tristan, stop! She cried, but his eyes were no longer his own. Gold devoured the gray pupils, slitted his voice, replaced by a low guttural snarl that vibrated through the floor. For a heartbeat, their gazes locked. The wolf recognized her, but the man inside fought to stay buried. Then he turned, slamming his fist against the stone wall hard enough to crack it. Get out! He roared, the sound layered with both man and monster. Emma backed away, heart pounding, the glowing mark still throbbing beneath her skin. But when she reached the door, she hesitated. The air reeked of his pain, feral, desperate, uncontainable. Then his roar shook the manor to its foundations. Guards rushed in, Daniel leading them, his face tight with determination. Get her out, he barked to the others. But Tristan's voice, ragged and broken, cut through the chaos. "Don't touch her." The command froze everyone in place. Even half-transformed, his authority as Alpha remained absolute. Emma stood in the doorway watching as Tristan fought the change muscles, rippling beneath skin, that couldn't decide whether to be flesh or fur. Their eyes met one final time before he turned away, disappearing through a hidden door in the far wall of the chamber. Hours later, the manor was in chaos. Tristan had locked himself in the underground chamber she'd discovered, reinforced with chains and wolfsbane to keep the beast contained. The pack moved in fearful silence. No one dared speak of what they had seen, but their eyes followed Emma with renewed wariness. She sat outside the locked doors of the underground chamber, her back pressed to the cold stone, refusing to leave. She could still feel him, his agony thrumming through the bond that clawed at her chest. When Daniel found her there, he sighed heavily. "You shouldn't be near him right now," he said, his earlier hostility replaced by something like resignation. "I'm not leaving him like this," she replied, her determination unwavering. The beta studied her, something sharp flickering behind his calm expression. "You don't understand what happens when his control breaks." "Then enlighten me," she demanded. Daniel's jaw tightened, his gaze drifting to the heavy door that separated them from Tristan. He hesitated, then lowered himself to the stone steps beside her, keeping a careful distance. For the first time, she noticed the silver threading his dark hair, the lines etched beside his eyes. He was older than she'd first thought, or worn by years of vigilance. "War changes men," he began, echoing Harlow's words from earlier. "But the aftermath changes them more. I served under Tristan's father before him. Watched him grow from a headstrong boy to an alpha, too young to carry the burden placed on him." "You've known him all his life," Emma realized. Daniel nodded. "Long enough to see what the wolf inside him is capable of," he said. "You've heard what the healer told you. The last woman who bore his mark didn't survive." Emma nodded slowly. "Raymond told me." "But what he didn't tell you, Daniel continued, his voice dropping lower, "is how she died." Emma's breath stilled in her lungs. "What do you mean?" Daniel's voice lowered further, barely audible over the occasional sounds of movement behind the iron door. "The bond triggered during his shift. His wolf didn't recognize her as his mate." He paused, the memory clearly painful even for him. "It saw prey." Horror crawled up Emma's spine. "He attacked her." Tristan tore through half the manor trying to save her. Daniel continued, his eyes distant with memory. But when he came to, there was nothing left. Emma stared at him, pale and shaking. "And you think I'll end up the same?" Daniel's gaze returned to her face, assessing. "I think you're already closer to him than she ever was," he said quietly. "That makes you more dangerous." "To him or to all of you?" Emma asked, hearing the edge in her own voice. "Both," Daniel replied simply. "When an alpha loses control, the entire pack suffers." He rose, brushing dust from his clothes. "And we have suffered enough for one lifetime." Night fell again, the snow outside thick as ash, the wind howling against the windows. Emma returned to her room only long enough to change into proper clothes before making her way back to the underground chamber. The mark hummed beneath her skin, restless as if it knew he was still in pain. As she approached the hidden passages that led to the lower levels, she encountered Raymond, a lit torch in his hand, casting long shadows on the ancient walls. "The wise choice would be to run," the healer said, his dark eyes reflecting the flame. "Yet wisdom rarely governs the heart." "You knew," Emma said, "not a question, but an accusation. You knew who I was from the moment I arrived." Raymond inclined his head slightly. "I've lived long enough to recognize destiny when it walks through my door," he said, "even when it wears a different name. Why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Some truths must be earned," he replied. "Some memories must return on their own, or they destroy rather than heal." Emma studied the old man, seeing beyond his cryptic words to the concern beneath. "He's suffering," she said simply. "Yes," Raymond agreed, "as are you." "I can feel him," she admitted, pressing her hand to the mark. "Through this, like a second heartbeat alongside my own." The healer's expression softened. "In all my years, I've never seen a bond survive what yours has endured," he said. "Perhaps that means something." "What?" "That some wounds are meant to be healed," he said, rather than simply survived. With that, he handed her the torch and stepped aside, allowing her passage to the lower levels. Emma moved through the narrow corridors past guards who strangely didn't seem to see her slip by. It was as if the shadows themselves bent to conceal her passage. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the growls echoing from below, a primal counterpoint that resonated in her bones. When she reached the chamber, she saw that the door trembled against the weight of what lay behind it. Chains rattled from within. A shadow moved across the thin line of light visible beneath the iron. "Tristan," she whispered. A low growl answered her, a sound that could have been his name or a warning to stay away. She laid her hand on the iron door, and the mark flared in response, bright enough to illuminate the corridor. She gasped, eyes wide, as the lock clicked. The door creaked open an inch, just enough for heat and scent to flood out. Daniel's voice echoed from the hall behind her. "Emma, don't—" But it was too late. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The chains hung snapped and useless in the flickering torchlight. She saw him then, no longer Tristan, no longer man. Massive feral eyes burning gold. The wolf turned toward her, lips curling back over teeth longer than her fingers. And then it whispered her name, Emma. Her name left its mouth as a growl. Low, distorted, half-human, half-beast. The sound trembled through the air, vibrating in her bones. The creature before her was colossal. Black fur rippled over muscle breath, steaming in the cold chamber air. Yet those eyes, those storm gray eyes, still flickered through the gold for a fleeting second. His eyes. Tristan's eyes buried beneath the wolf watching her. "Tristan," she breathed, her voice trembling. "It's me." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound, nostrils flaring as he scented her. For a heartbeat he hesitated, intelligence warring with instinct in those inhuman eyes. But instinct won. He lunged. Emma screamed as the world blurred around her. Bone heat shadow. Her back hit the ground hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. The beast's claws dug into the floor beside her head, caging her, his breath hot and ragged against her throat. "Tristan, stop!" she gasped, heart threatening to burst from her chest. But the wolf's snarl deepened. His gaze burned with hunger. Not the hunger of the man who had kissed her, but something wilder, rawer, older. His nose brushed her skin where the mark lay, and it flared to life again, light spilling through the darkness. The wolf jerked as if struck, torn between scent and memory. Emma's hands rose slowly, trembling, but determined. "Don't pull away," she whispered, the same words that once bound them. His breathing stuttered. The snarl died in his throat. Gold and gray battled for dominance in his eyes. As she continued to speak, her voice soft, calm, like talking to a wounded thing. "You know me," she whispered. "You know me, Tristan." Her scent, warm and sweet and wild, filled the room, steady and grounding, like an anchor in a storm. The wolf trembled violently, muscles tensing as though fighting himself. A low pain sound escaped him, not a growl this time, but a cry. "Please," she whispered, a prayer without a god, "come back to me." Impossibly, the beast lowered his head. His forehead pressed against hers, hot breath trembling between them. The bond hummed in the air like lightning before a storm. And slowly, bone by bone, breath by breath, the wolf began to shrink. The sound of shifting flesh filled the chamber, not the violent forced change of earlier, but something smoother, willing. When it ended, Tristan lay before her, human again, naked and shaking, his skin glistening with sweat and blood where the chains had cut into him. Emma caught him before he collapsed, completely cradling his head against her lap. His pulse was erratic, his breathing shallow. She stroked his hair back from his face, tears blurring her vision. "You came back," she murmured, wonder coloring her voice. His eyes fluttered open, finding hers with effort. "You shouldn't have stayed," he rasped. "Maybe," she said softly, "but I did." His hand lifted weakly, brushing her mark. The contact sent heat spiraling through both of them, not painful this time, but affirming. He exhaled, trembling, and then collapsed, fully unconscious, but at peace. She sat there for what felt like hours, holding him as the torches burned low. The air smelled of sweat and iron and something ancient, the scent of a promise half fulfilled. When dawn filtered through the cracks in the stone, he stirred. His body was still heavy with exhaustion, but something new burned against her skin, a deep, dark ache that wasn't there before. She brushed her fingers across her collarbone and froze. The mark was darker now, its shape sharper veins of shadow branching beneath the skin like roots seeking water. She looked down at Tristan and saw the same mark pulsing faintly on his neck. Two hearts, one rhythm. Her pulse stumbled as realization set in. The bond hadn't died. It had finished. Tristan woke with a gasp, his eyes burning silver black. He gripped her wrist, voice low and guttural, trembling with both fear and desire. "Emma, it's done. You're mine now." His words fell heavy between them, too raw, too real to deny. The silence that followed felt alive, pulsing with something older than both of them. Their pulses matched their marks, burning faintly in unison. She should have felt safe, maybe even wanted. But what bloomed inside her chest was far from peace. It was terror, not of him, but of the fragments of memory that now assaulted her mind. Flashes of fire, of screams, of a name that wasn't hers but somehow was. Tristan's hand still gripped her wrist, possessive even as his touch trembled with restraint. His breath was uneven, ragged, with the effort of control. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "The pull like your heart beats inside me." "I feel it," she admitted. "But there's something else. Dreams, memories that can't be mine." He released her slowly, jaw tight with tension. "They are yours," he said, "just not Emma's." That night, Emma dreamed again of fire. But this time the dream was too sharp, too detailed to be mere imagination. She saw a great hall burning, different from Black Ridge Manor, but somehow familiar. She saw herself younger, standing before Tristan, with blood on her hands. His wolf eyes met hers through the flames as he whispered a name. Lyanna. She woke drenched in sweat, the mark throbbing in rhythm with the name that now felt like her own. When she stepped into the corridor, Tristan was waiting, shirt undone, eyes wild from sleeplessness. "You said her name in your sleep," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Lyanna," Emma whispered, testing the shape of it on her tongue. He flinched as if she'd struck him. "You're remembering." "Pieces," she admitted. "Fire, screaming. You looking at me through flames." "When my men held me back," he said softly, "as I watched your father's blood on my hands." Emma's heart stuttered. A flash of memory seared through her mind. A man with kind eyes, his hand warm around hers. Her father, Blackwood, the rival Alpha. "What am I?" she asked, her voice breaking on the question. "You're Lyanna Blackwood," Tristan answered, each word clearly causing him physical pain. "Daughter of James Blackwood, the Alpha I killed in the clan wars." The truth hit her like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. She staggered back, clutching the doorframe as her world dissolved and reformed around this new reality. "I am the daughter of your enemy," she whispered, the pieces finally falling into place. "The child of the pack you destroyed." Tristan nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers. "And the woman I marked as mine before the moon was ready to accept it." Emma felt her knees weaken as the full weight of their history crashed down upon her. She was both victim and survivor, both enemy and mate. The orphan who had forgotten her own name, returning unwittingly to the very man who had made her an orphan to begin with. "How?" she demanded, anger finally finding its voice. "How did this happen? When I found you at the border?" Tristan began, his voice low with remembered guilt. "I didn't know who you were. You were just a girl, lost and afraid. My wolf recognized something in you before I understood what it meant. And then I learned your name," he continued. "By then the mark was already done. When your memory was bound to save you from the bond, your identity was buried with it." Emma stared at him, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "You killed my father," she whispered, the accusation hanging in the air between them. "Yes," he admitted, making no attempt to defend himself. "You destroyed my pack." "Yes. And yet," she said, her voice breaking on a sob, "I can't stop feeling this pull toward you." Tristan's expression cracked, revealing the depth of his torment. "That's the bond," he said. "It doesn't care about the past, only the connection." "Then what happens now?" she asked, suddenly exhausted by the weight of revelations. Tristan took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "That," he said quietly, "is entirely your choice." Emma stood at her window, watching the first light of dawn creep across the snow-laden mountains. The mark throbbed beneath her skin, each pulse carrying memories she couldn't fully grasp yet. Memories of another life, another name. Lyanna Blackwood. The truth had shattered everything she thought she knew about herself. She was not an orphan from Helena with no past. She was the daughter of James Blackwood, Alpha of the Moonstone Pack. The very pack Tristan Gray had destroyed in the clan wars. She was the survivor of a massacre, her memory and identity erased to save her from a bond that should have killed her. And now that bond was complete, tying her irrevocably to the man who had murdered her family. The decision formed in her mind like frost crystallizing on glass, sudden, clear, and cold. She couldn't stay. Not with the truth burning inside her. Not with his confession still echoing in her ears. She gathered a few belongings, wrapped her cloak tight around her shoulders, and slipped from her room while the manor still slept. The corridors were silent, the guards changing shifts. No one noticed as she made her way down the servants' staircase and out through the kitchen gardens. The moment she passed beyond the manor walls, the mark on her neck flared with warning heat, but she pushed forward each step, carrying her deeper into the forest. Behind her, deep within the manor, Tristan woke with a violent start. Pain lanced through his chest as the bond stretched thin between them. He knew instantly what was happening. She was leaving. Running from him, from the truth, from the bond that bound them. Emma, he gasped the word, more growl than speech. He staggered from his bedclothes, already extending as panic fueled his wolf's emergence. He slammed his fist against the stone wall, fighting for control, even as the beast inside him howled for pursuit. Blood ran from his knuckles as he dragged in ragged breaths. Find her, he ordered the guards outside his door. Now. But he knew they'd be too late. The bond pulsed like an open wound in his chest, each beat of her heart growing more distant. He could feel her path through the forest, heading east toward the ancient stone circle, where the Moonstone Pack had once held their ceremonies, a place her conscious mind had forgotten, but her blood still remembered. In the manor below, Daniel organized search parties, while Raymond prepared herbs and poultices for what would inevitably be needed when they returned. Harlow watched from a window, his weathered face grim with understanding. She's going to the Moonstone grounds, the old soldier said to no one in particular. Blood calls to blood. Meanwhile, Emma pushed deeper into the wilderness, each breath clouding in the frigid morning air. The mark burned hotter with every step, punishing her for the separation, but she gritted her teeth against the pain. Physical discomfort was nothing compared to the storm of emotions raging inside her. Her feet followed paths she couldn't consciously remember, bringing her finally to a clearing ringed by ancient stones. Snow had drifted against them, but she could still make out carvings, wolves running beneath a full moon, symbols of an old magic that predated human memory. At the center stood a flat altar stone, and as she approached, memories crashed over her like waves. She remembered kneeling there as a child while her father, tall and proud, conducted ceremonies beneath the light of the harvest moon. She remembered dancing with other pack children around fires that warmed the night. She remembered belonging, and she remembered the night had ended. Fire and blood and screams as gray wolves tore through her people. Her father standing defiant until the last, facing Tristan with dignity even as the younger alpha's claws tore out his throat. Emma fell to her knees in the snow, a cry tearing from her lips as the memories became too much to bear. The mark on her neck pulsed violently, light spilling from beneath her skin. Blood trickled from the edges of the mark, staining the collar of her dress. "If I stay, he'll die," she whispered, voice breaking. "If I go, I'll die." The pain escalated until she could barely breathe, the bond rejecting the separation with an increasing violence. She could feel Tristan through it, his rage and panic bleeding into her consciousness as he fought his own transformation. She could sense him drawing closer, tracking her through the connection they shared. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as the bond's punishment intensified. Her pulse slowed, her body growing heavier as blood leaked from the mark in steady crimson rivulets. She slumped forward into the snow, her consciousness flickering like a candle in a draft. "Tristan." She whispered his name, both plea and accusation. Miles away, Tristan collapsed mid-stride, a roar of agony tearing from his throat as he felt Emma's life force ebbing. The change took him then, bones cracking and reforming, muscles bulging and shifting beneath splitting skin. He fought to maintain some remnant of his human mind, even as the wolf took over, knowing that complete surrender would doom them both. His transformation complete, he bounded through the forest faster than any human could travel, snow flying beneath massive paws, breath steaming in the winter air. His mind held a single focus: reach her before the bond severed completely. Through snow and shadow he ran, following the invisible thread that connected his heart to hers. When he reached the edge of the stone circle, he saw her lying motionless, half buried in fresh snow blood, bright against white. For the first time in his life, the wolf hesitated, whining in confusion and distress. The scent of her blood triggered predatory instincts, but the bond screamed, "Mate, not prey." He approached cautiously, muscles trembling with the effort of restraint until he stood over her still form. Emma's eyes fluttered open at his approach, silver meeting the crimson of his wolf's gaze. The mark on her neck pulsed faintly, responding to his presence despite her body's weakness. "Why?" she asked, the word barely more than a breath. "Why did you come?" The wolf whined, shifting forms gradually as Tristan fought to reclaim enough humanity to speak. His voice, when it came, was rough and broken, caught between man and beast. "Because I can't breathe without you," he said, dropping to his knees beside her. "Because I've already burned for what I did, and still the fire doesn't stop." Emma stared up at him through tears that froze on her lashes. The hatred she wanted to feel wouldn't come crowded out by the connection that hummed between them even now. "You killed everything I loved." She whispered the words like shards of ice between them. "And yet I can't stop loving you." Tristan's body shuddered with the effort of maintaining his human form. The beast inside him clawed for control, wanting to claim and possess, but the man, the alpha, knew better. He couldn't take what must be freely given. Not again. Not after everything. He lowered himself until his forehead touched the snow before her, a supplicant before judgment. "Then end it, Emma," he said, voice raw with surrender. "Kill me or stay." The air between them grew still, the forest holding its breath. Snow fell in lazy spirals, each flake a moment suspended in time. Emma's hand moved to her side where she concealed a knife, the same blade Raymond had pressed into her hand the night before, ancient silver etched with symbols she couldn't read. "You knew I would run," she realized aloud. "You knew, and still you gave me the means to end you." Tristan didn't move, didn't beg, just knelt there with his neck exposed, waiting for her judgment. "An alpha protects his mate," he said simply, "even from himself." Emma gripped the dagger, its weight unfamiliar, yet somehow right in her palm. She pressed the blade to his throat, watching a thin line of red bloom against his skin. The mark on her neck pulsed in time with his heartbeat, every fiber of her being rejecting the idea of harming him, even as her mind screamed for justice. "If you choose death," Tristan whispered, eyes burning into hers, "then let it be ours." The world seemed to pause at the edge of the blade. Snowflakes hung, suspended in the air, time bending between her shaking hand and his steady breath. And in that stillness, clarity came to her like dawn, breaking over the mountains. Revenge wouldn't resurrect her father or restore her pack. It would only complete the cycle of violence that had consumed them all. There had been enough death. The knife slipped from her grasp and sank into the snow with a soft thud. Instead, she pressed her palm to his chest, directly over his heart. The moment their skin connected, the bond flared violently, light bursting from their marks in a corona that turned night to day. Tristan gasped, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining as power surged between them. The world spun around them in a whirlwind of snow and shadow and light, the bond reconnecting not as a curse but as choice. Through it, she saw everything: Tristan's guilt and regret, the years of solitude. His horror when he realized who she was, his desperate attempts to protect her from himself. And he saw her, her fragmented memories, her confusion, her anger. And beneath it all, the undeniable connection that had survived death itself. "You were never supposed to come back," he said, voice breaking with wonder. "You were never supposed to kill me," she countered, equally awed by what flowed between them. Their foreheads pressed together, breath mingling in the cold air, neither willing to break the contact that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. But the peace of the moment was shattered by a low growl from the edge of the clearing. Emma tensed, sensing the threat before she saw it. Tristan reacted instantly, positioning himself between her and the newcomer, a warning growl rumbling from his chest. Daniel Morrison stepped from the shadows, his eyes sharp and cold in the pre-dawn light. His face, once familiar, now seemed like a stranger's mask, contempt twisting his features into something ugly and alien. "I warned you this would happen," the beta said, voice carrying across the snow with unnerving calm. "The last time he loved, he tore this pack apart. I couldn't let him do it again." Tristan rose slowly, his body still weak from the transformation, but tensed for battle. "You, disbelief and betrayal," colored the single word. Daniel's lips curled in a bitter smile. "You think I'd watch you destroy yourself again? You think I'd serve a wolf who can't control what's inside him?" Emma's heart raced as the understanding dawned. "You're the one who cursed the bond," she said, the pieces falling into place. The beta's cold gaze shifted to her. "I didn't curse it. I contained it until she came back. A shimmer appeared around Daniel's hands, silver dust glinting in the faint light. Not the natural magic of the earth, but something darker twisted by years of jealousy and resentment. All this time, Daniel hadn't been protecting the pack from Tristan. He'd been keeping Tristan broken, ensuring the alpha remained damaged, independent. Tristan stepped forward, a warning snarl building in his throat. "Don't you dare." But he was still weak from the bond's punishment, his reactions slowed by exhaustion. Daniel moved with unnatural speed, drawing a blade of pure silver from beneath his coat. The metal caught the first rays of dawn, then plunged deep into Tristan's chest before either of them could react. The sound wet final tore a scream from Emma's throat. Tristan's body jerked, his eyes widened in shock, blood blooming across his chest in a dark stain. She caught him as he fell, lowering him to the snow, her hands frantically trying to stem the flow of crimson. "No, no, no," she cried, pressing her palm against the wound. "Not now, not like this." Daniel stood over them, his face empty of remorse. "Now the curse will break," he said with cold satisfaction. "The bond will die with him." Tristan's eyes fixed on Emma's face, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His hand found hers, fingers weakly intertwining despite the blood that slicked their skin. "Don't pull away," he whispered, the words an echo from their first meeting now breaking with finality. She bent over him, tears falling onto his face as his life bled out into the snow. "I wasn't planning to." The mark on her neck flared suddenly with such intensity that the air itself seemed to crack with power. Light erupted from Tristan's chest, not from the wound, but from somewhere deeper. Something ancient and primal responding to their shared desperation. The burst of energy threw Daniel backwards, sending him sprawling into the snow. He scrambled to his feet, eyes wide with fear, as the light continued to build between Emma and Tristan. "What have you done?" the beta demanded, backing away. Emma didn't answer. She couldn't have if she tried. Her entire being was focused on Tristan, on the fading pulse beneath her fingers, on the bond that stretched between them like gossamer threads about to snap. As Tristan's body convulsed, something remarkable happened. The wound in his chest began to seal itself, silver light weaving through torn flesh like living thread. His eyes, once gray, split into dual colors, one gold, one black, as power, older than the mountains themselves, awakened. The stone circle around them hummed with energy, ancient symbols carved into the megaliths beginning to glow, with the same silver light that emanated from their marks. This was old magic, the kind that existed before pacts and territories and wars, the kind that remembered when wolves and humans first made their covenant with the moon. Tristan's breathing steadied, but as his wound healed, Emma felt her own strength fading. The bond was using her life force to save him, drawing on her energy to repair what silver had destroyed. Her vision dimmed at the edges, her body growing heavier with each passing moment. "Tristan," she whispered, her voice thin as mist. He heard her through the haze of healing, his eyes focusing on her face as awareness returned. He saw immediately what was happening, what she was giving to save him, and panic surged through him. "Emma, no," he gasped, catching her as she swayed. "Look at me, stay with me." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "Told you I wasn't planning to." Then her eyes fluttered closed, her body slumping against his. The mark on her neck, once bright with life, dimmed to barely a flicker. Tristan felt it like a physical blow, the bond stretching to its breaking point as her life force ebbed. "No," he growled, gathering her into his arms. "You don't get to leave me, Emma. Not now, not after everything." He pressed his palm over her heart, desperate to return what she'd given him, to push his strength back through their connection. But the bond had its own rules, its own wisdom. The mark on his neck pulsed strongly, but on hers it flickered like a dying ember. The clearing fell silent. Even the wind held its breath. Tristan's tears fell onto Emma's pale face as he held her against his chest, his body curled protectively around hers, as if he could shield her from death itself. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered brokenly, the words an unconscious echo of their first meeting. A soft exhalation parted Emma's lips, barely perceptible. And then, like a miracle, her voice reached him. "Don't pull away." Tristan froze, the words striking through his heart like lightning. His arms tightened around her, his forehead pressing to hers. His voice broke as he answered with the words that had always bound them. "I wasn't planning to." The moon, though invisible in the morning sky, made its presence known. Silver light poured down into the clearing, unnaturally bright, bathing their intertwined forms in celestial fire. Tristan felt something stir beneath them, a hum of power rising from the earth itself, older than any curse, any hatred. Then, as he held her swing palm to his chest, Emma's mark reignited. The light spread through her veins like molten silver, bringing warmth back to her skin, strength back to her pulse. The bond wasn't ending, it was transforming. "The moon accepts," a voice said from the edge of the clearing. Tristan looked up to see Raymond standing there, his face solemn with understanding. Behind him, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch, stood Captain Harlow, bloodied but alive. "The beta?" Tristan asked, not loosening his hold on Emma. "Gone," Harlow confirmed, nodding toward the cliff edge beyond the stones. "Some betrayals can't be forgiven." Tristan rose with Emma cradled in his arms, her breathing stronger now, though she remained unconscious. The mark on her neck pulsed in rhythm with his no longer fighting but harmonizing. The wound in his chest had closed completely, leaving only a silver scar in the shape of a crescent moon. "What happened?" he asked Raymond, nodding toward Emma. The healer approached, checking her pulse with gentle fingers. "The moon has chosen," he said simply. "What began in blood is reborn in sacrifice. The curse is broken." "And Daniel?" "Some wolves are born to serve the pack," Raymond said. "Others serve only their own ambitions. He forgot that power without wisdom destroys itself." Harlow limped closer, his military bearing undiminished despite his injuries. "We should return to the manor," he advised. "Dawn's breaking, and these woods still hold dangers." Tristan nodded, shifting Emma's weight in his arms to carry her more securely. As they prepared to leave the stone circle, gave one final pulse of energy, as if acknowledging the completion of some ancient rite. The marks on Tristan and Emma's necks flared briefly in response, then settled into a steady, gentle glow. The journey back to Black Ridge Manor was slow, with Harlow's injuries and Emma's unconscious state demanding careful progress. By the time they reached the iron gates, the sun had fully risen, turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Tristan carried Emma directly to the great hall, laying her gently on a fur-lined couch near the massive hearth. The room where they had first met now felt different, no longer a place of fear and secrets, but a sanctuary. He knelt beside her, one hand clasping hers, the other brushing hair from her face with infinite tenderness. "Emma," he whispered, pouring all his hope into her name. "Come back to me, please." Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. For a moment, confusion clouded her gaze, then recognition dawned. "Tristan!" Relief crashed over him like a wave. "I'm here," he said, voice rough with emotion. She struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at muscles strained by the bond's demands. Her hand rose to her neck, where the mark now pulsed steadily, no longer painful, but present, a reminder of what they'd survived. "The bond," she said. "It's different." Tristan nodded, taking her hand and guiding it to his own mark, letting her feel the matching rhythm. "We're different," he replied. "Both of us." She studied his face, noting the changes the morning had wrought. The perpetual tension was gone from his features, replaced by something approaching peace. His eyes, once storm gray and turbulent, now held flecks of gold, as if the wolf and man had finally found balance. "Daniel?" she asked. "Gone," Tristan confirmed. "The mountain claimed him." Emma was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "And us, what happens now?" "That," he said, echoing his words from the night before, "is entirely your choice." She looked around the great hall, seeing it with new eyes, not as Emma the orphan, nor as Lyanna the victim, but as someone new forged in the crucible of remembrance and choice. "The Moonstone Pack is gone," she said softly, "but I'm still here. Their blood, their legacy lives in me." Tristan nodded, understanding her meaning. "Two packs could become one," he suggested, "not through conquest, but through choice." Emma's hand found his fingers intertwining. The touch sent warmth spiraling through the bond, no longer painful but affirming. "It won't be easy," she warned. "There's too much history." "History can be honored without being repeated," he countered. "The old generation fought their wars. Perhaps ours is meant for healing." Footsteps approached the hall, the soft tread of Eleanor, the steady gait of Raymond, the measured step of Harlow. They entered bearing food, medicines, clean clothes. The pack gathering to care for their alpha and his mate. No fear in their eyes now, only curiosity, hope, and the tentative beginnings of respect. As Emma accepted a blanket from Eleanor, the older woman surprised her by covering her hand with gnarled fingers. "The kitchens will prepare whatever strengthens you." she said, her gruff voice softened by genuine concern. Tristan watched the interaction with something like wonder. For too long, his pack had moved in fear around him. To see them respond to Emma with warmth felt like the first thaw after an endless winter. Raymond approached next, laying healing herbs beside Emma. The moon's blessing carries responsibility, he told them both. What was broken must now be rebuilt. Can it be? Emma asked him, doubt clouding her voice. After so much blood, the old healer's eyes, wise with the weight of years, held steady confidence. I have lived long enough to see hatred become love, he said. I have watched enemies become family. This is why old men like me keep living to witness such miracles. Harlow stood at attention nearby, his military bearing undiminished despite his injuries. When Tristan beckoned him closer, the captain approached with the same dignity he'd shown during their first meeting. The eastern wing should be prepared, Tristan instructed him. It's time we open those rooms again. Understanding flickered in Harlow's eyes. The eastern wing had been the traditional quarters for visiting Pax allies, not enemies. It had remained sealed since the clan wars, a silent monument to what had been lost. Consider it done, the captain replied, then hesitated before adding, I served your father and I've served you. I would be honored to serve a united pack. Tristan nodded, gratitude in his eyes for the old soldier's unwavering loyalty. We'll need your experience more than ever, he acknowledged. War is easy compared to peace. In Korea, Harlow said, his voice dropping so only Tristan and Emma could hear. I saw villages destroyed by fighting between men who should have been brothers. But I also saw them rebuild together, stone by stone. His weathered face creased in a rare smile. Those were the victories that mattered. As the morning progressed, Emma regained her strength while Tristan reorganized the pack. Daniel's betrayal had left gaps in the hierarchy that needed filling, and the revelation of Emma's identity, of who she had been and who she would become, required careful explanation. Yet to Tristan's surprise, the pack accepted the changes with more relief than resistance. Daniel's influence had been a shadow over them all, it seemed. That evening, Emma found herself alone with Tristan in his quarters, standing at the window that overlooked the valley below. Snow had begun falling again, gentle flakes that drifted like memories in the purple twilight. Do you remember the first night we met? He asked, his voice soft with reminiscence. When I told you that you shouldn't be here. I remember, she said, turning to face him. You were trying to protect me even then. He stepped closer, his hand rising to brush the mark on her neck. The touch sent warmth spiraling through the bond, comfort rather than possession. I didn't know how, he admitted. I only knew that I'd destroy you if I claimed you. And now, now I understand that true strength isn't in taking but in surrendering. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. I surrender to you, Emma Winters, Lyanna Blackwood, whoever you choose to be. She studied his face, seeing the man beneath the alpha, the vulnerability beneath the strength. I choose to be yours, she said simply. Not because fate marked me, but because I choose it freely. Tristan's breath caught his eyes, brightening with emotion too deep for words. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and when she didn't, he kissed her with a tenderness that belied his power. Unlike their first kiss, born of desperation and defiance, this one spoke of hope, of beginning rather than ending, of possibility rather than doom. The marks on their necks pulsed in unison, not with frantic need, but with steady affirmation. When they parted, Emma rested her forehead against his, content to breathe the same air, to exist in the same moment. Don't pull away, she whispered, the words no longer a plea, but a promise. His arms encircled her, solid and sure. I wasn't planning to. 1 month later, as spring's first tentative fingers reached into the mountain valleys, Tristan and Emma stood on the manor's highest balcony. Below them in the courtyard, newcomers gathered, lone wolves seeking sanctuary, drawn by rumors of an alpha pair, whose bond had broken an ancient curse. They need more than just an alpha, Emma observed, watching the hesitant interactions below. They need guidance, hope. They'll have both, Tristan replied, his hand finding hers. The marks on their throats glowed faintly in the twilight, twin symbols of a power neither fully understood, but both had learned to respect. Emma smiled, her free hand drifting unconsciously to her abdomen. All three of us will have much to teach them. Tristan's eyes widened, then softened with wonder as understanding dawned. His hand joined hers, feeling the faint new pulse that echoed their own life, born from a bond once meant to bring only death. Behind them, Raymond and Harlow exchanged knowing glances, two old warriors who had lived long enough to see destruction give way to creation. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to find redemption, Harlow murmured, watching as Alpha embraced the future neither of them had dared to imagine. But it's always worth the wait. Raymond nodded, wisdom of centuries in his eyes. The strongest bonds are forged in fire, he said softly, and tempered by forgiveness. Below, the new pack howled in greeting to the rising moon, a sound not of hunger or challenge but of belonging. A chorus of voices finding harmony after discord. The echo carried across the valley through the ancient pines, reaching places where only memory had lived for decades. In the heart of Black Ridge Manor, where darkness once ruled, light pulsed through stone and wood and flesh. A curse born of blood and loss ended not by magic or sacrifice, but by the simplest, most powerful act of all, the choice to love what once was hated. The story of the Alpha and his mate, of Tristan and Emma, of death and life and second chances, would be told for generations. Not as a tale of monsters, but as proof that even the most damaged souls can find healing when they choose to see beyond the scars of the past. Their marks glowed softly in the gathering darkness, no longer separate, but one just as they were always meant to be.